What if the loneliest person you ignored every day was actually testing you? What if that silent stranger in the corner booth wasn't broke and forgotten, but a billionaire in disguise, recording your every move, cataloging your character, deciding whether you deserved a fortune or nothing at all? Most people failed Eleanor Whitmore's test without ever knowing they were being graded. Rachel Bennett passed without knowing there was a test to begin with. Sullivan's Diner sat on a forgotten corner where Pike Street met the Seattle waterfront, a relic that progress had somehow overlooked. The morning air inside carried the sharp bite of burnt coffee mixed with the chemical sweetness of artificial creamer and the grease-heavy scent of hash browns sizzling on a griddle that had been cooking breakfast since 1967. Red vinyl booths split open like wounds. Fluorescent lights hummed their endless headache song. This wasn't a place people chose. It was a place people ended up when better options had run out. For the construction workers nursing hangovers, the night shift nurses counting down to sleep, and the waitress pouring their coffee, Sullivan's Diner wasn't charming. It was oxygen. For Rachel Bennett, 29 years old and drowning, the smell of that diner had become the scent of survival itself. She pulled into the cracked parking lot every morning at 5:45, her 15-year-old Honda Civic rattling like a bag of rusty bolts, the check engine light glowing with the persistence of a threat she couldn't afford to address. 200,000 miles on the odometer, maybe 200 more before the transmission finally gave up, maybe less. The medical bills sat in a shoebox under her bed. $47,000, her mother's final gift, stage 4 ovarian cancer that had burned through their savings, their hope, and finally, 6 months ago, her mother's life. Rachel had signed every form, approved every treatment, held her mother's hand through every chemo session, and watched her slip away on a Tuesday morning in March. The debt remained. The collection letters arrived weekly, each one a little more threatening than the last. Her landlord had stopped being polite 3 months ago. The eviction warnings came now instead of small talk. 60 days, then 30, now 14. Rachel worked the morning shift, went home to sleep 4 hours, then returned for the dinner rush. Double shifts, 6 days a week, 72 hours, barely enough to cover rent, the Honda's gas tank, and the ramen noodles that had become her primary food group. 3 years ago, she'd been accepted to the Seattle Culinary Institute. Full scholarship. Her mother had cried with joy. Rachel had framed the acceptance letter, hung it above her bed, and started planning the life she'd always imagined. Her own restaurant, her own recipes, her own name on a door that mattered. Then her mother got sick. The scholarship expired while Rachel sat in hospital waiting rooms. The framed letter came down. Dreams were luxuries for people who had the space to breathe. Now Rachel moved through Sullivan's Diner with practiced invisibility, refilling coffee before it was requested, memorizing orders after hearing them once, becoming part of the infrastructure like the cracked vinyl and the humming lights. Her co-workers called it people-pleasing. Her manager, Frank Patterson, called it finally doing her job. Rachel called it the only thing standing between her and sleeping in the Honda. Eleanor Whitmore appeared on a Tuesday morning in November like weather that no forecast had predicted. She was old, somewhere between 70 and 80. The kind of age where decades blurred together, with silver hair pulled into a severe bun so tight it seemed to stretch her face. She wore a charcoal wool coat that had cost someone a fortune 30 years ago, leather gloves worn thin at the fingertips, and shoes that had been resoled more times than replaced. Money whispered in the fabric, but it was old money, quiet money, the kind that didn't announce itself anymore. She took booth 7 without asking, without looking at anyone, without acknowledging the diner existed beyond the corner she claimed. The silence that followed her wasn't just absence of sound. It was presence of something else, a weight that pushed noise away, a gravity that made the other servers step back instinctively. Booth 7 had a reputation. The vinyl was more torn than the others. The table wobbled. The view faced the dumpster in the alley. Tips averaged $2 on a good day. Most servers pretended not to see when customers sat there. Frank Patterson, the manager, pulled Rachel aside within 5 minutes. He was a man whose face seemed permanently arranged in preemptive disapproval. Thin lips pressed together like he'd just tasted something spoiled. Booth 7, he said, nodding toward Eleanor. $2 tipper. Maybe. Don't waste energy. Rachel walked over anyway. She had to. It was her section, her job, her 72 hours a week that kept the Honda running and the eviction at bay. She approached with her order pad ready, her smile automatic, her voice pitched to the friendly but not intrusive tone that earned the best tips. "Good morning. Can I start you with some coffee?" Eleanor stared past her, through her, as if Rachel were made of glass or air or nothing at all. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10. 15. Rachel's smile wavered, but held. She tried again. "Our special today is black coffee. Wheat toast. Dry." The words came out flat, emotionless, dismissive. Eleanor still hadn't looked at her. Rachel wrote down the order she would have written down anyway and walked back to the kitchen, feeling something she couldn't quite name. Not anger, not hurt. Something smaller and colder. Insignificance. The first week, Eleanor came every morning at exactly 6:47. Same booth, same order, same silence that pushed the world away. Rachel served her, refilled her coffee, brought her check, and received nothing in return. No eye contact. No thank you. No acknowledgement that Rachel existed beyond being the mechanism that delivered food. Other servers watched and shook their heads. "Why do you even bother?" asked Maria, a veteran waitress who'd worked Sullivan's for 12 years and had seen every type of difficult customer the city could produce. "She treats you like furniture." Rachel didn't have a good answer. She bothered because it was her job. She bothered because ignoring a customer felt wrong in a way she couldn't articulate. She bothered because something about Eleanor's silence felt less like rudeness and more like pain. Week 3 brought the first shift. Rachel noticed Eleanor's hands trembling as she lifted her coffee cup. Not a casual shake of too much caffeine. The sustained tremor of age or illness or both. The cup rattled against the saucer. Coffee sloshed. Eleanor set it down quickly, her jaw tight with what might have been embarrassment or might have been anger. Rachel saw her grandmother in that tremor, saw the arthritis that had turned simple tasks into battles, saw the pride that refused to ask for help even when help was desperately needed. That night, Rachel lay in her cramped studio apartment, 14 days from eviction, and thought about hands that shook and coffee that spilled and pride that stayed silent. The next morning, Rachel cut Eleanor's toast into triangles before bringing it to booth 7. Smaller pieces, easier to grip, easier to manage with hands that betrayed you. She set the plate down without comment, without drawing attention to the change, without making it a thing that required acknowledgement or gratitude. Eleanor stared at the triangles for a long moment. Then she picked one up. Her hand still shook, but the smaller piece was manageable. She ate in silence. Rachel refilled her coffee and walked away. Month 2. Rachel added a small dish of honey to the tray. She'd remembered her grandmother needed sweetness to make bitter things bearable. The pills, the doctor visits, the slow betrayal of a body that no longer cooperated. Eleanor stared at the honey dish the same way she'd stared at the triangle toast. Long enough that Rachel wondered if she'd made a mistake, crossed some invisible line, presumed too much. Then Eleanor dipped the corner of her toast in the honey and took a bite. Still no words, still no eye contact, but she ate it. Month 3 brought the coffee temperature adjustment. Rachel noticed Eleanor waiting longer before drinking, letting it cool, avoiding the burn that came from liquid too hot for sensitive mouths. Rachel started pouring Eleanor's coffee first, letting it sit for 3 minutes while she served other tables, bringing it to booth 7 at the exact temperature that wouldn't scald. Her co-workers noticed. Frank noticed. The mockery started gentle and grew sharper. "She your new best friend?" Maria asked with a laugh that had edges. "You writing her into your will?" Frank said nothing, but his disapproval radiated like heat from a grill. Rachel couldn't explain why she continued. The tips didn't improve. Eleanor never said thank you. The silence remained absolute. But something about those 15 minutes every morning felt important in a way her exhausted brain couldn't process. So she kept cutting the toast into triangles, kept bringing the honey dish, kept pouring the coffee at the right temperature. Month 4, Rachel started talking. Not to get responses, she'd stopped expecting those, but to fill the silence with something softer than the diner's harsh, fluorescent hum. Small things. Weather observations. A story about the Honda's latest mechanical complaint. Dreams she used to have about culinary school. spoken in past tense like eulogies for dead ambitions. Eleanor never responded, never looked up, never gave any indication she was listening. Rachel talked anyway, to the top of Eleanor's silver head, to the space between them, to the universe that seemed determined to prove kindness was pointless. Month 6 brought the nod, barely perceptible, a slight dip of Eleanor's chin as Rachel set down the coffee. A gesture so small Rachel almost missed it. Recognition. Acknowledgement. The first crack in 6 months of stone. Rachel went home that night and cried in her Honda for 20 minutes before climbing the stairs to her apartment. She didn't know why the nod mattered. Didn't know why this silent stranger had become something like important. Didn't know that Eleanor Whitmore was recording everything, cataloging every gesture, grading a test Rachel didn't know she was taking. The mathematics of Rachel's life had become brutally simple. 72 hours of work bought her 2 more weeks in the apartment, gas for the Honda, and enough ramen to keep her functional. Medical debt collectors called 3 times a week. Her mother's anniversary approached like storm she couldn't outrun. The culinary school acceptance letter stayed in its frame, hidden in a drawer now, a monument to the person she used to think she'd become. In that chaos, Booth 7 became something unexpected. Those 15 minutes every morning, 6:47 to 7:02, almost exactly, were the only interaction in her life where she wasn't failing someone, disappointing someone, owing someone, or drowning. Eleanor demanded nothing, expected nothing, required nothing beyond triangle toast, honey, and coffee at the right temperature. Rachel didn't notice that she'd started arriving at the diner 5 minutes earlier to make sure the toast was cut perfectly. Didn't notice that she'd started looking forward to the silence that used to feel like rejection. Didn't notice that these moments had become a strange anchor in the storm, the one fixed point in a life that was spinning out of control. She only knew that when Eleanor's cup was full and the honey dish was in place, she could breathe a little easier. For 15 minutes, she could pretend she was good at something that mattered. Tuesday morning arrived like every other Tuesday. Rachel's alarm screamed at 5:30. The Honda coughed to life on the 3rd try. The parking lot was empty except for Frank's truck and the dumpster that needed emptying 3 days ago. Everything followed the script her life had become, except Booth 7 stayed empty. 6:47 came and went. Rachel glanced at the door between pouring coffee for the construction crew and delivering eggs to the nurse, who always ordered scrambled with hot sauce. 6:52. Still empty. 6:58. Nothing. She checked the door again at 7:05, telling herself it didn't matter, that Eleanor was just a customer. That one missed day meant nothing. But her hands had already cut the toast into triangles. The honey dish sat on her tray. The coffee cooled to the exact temperature Eleanor preferred. 7:15. Rachel carried the plate to Booth 7 and set it down anyway. The toast sat there looking ridiculous, cut into careful triangles for no one. Maria walked past and raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Frank noticed from behind the register and shook his head with an expression that said, "I told you so," without needing words. 7:30. Rachel cleared the untouched toast and poured the coffee down the drain. Made fresh toast. Cut it into triangles again. Set it in Booth 7 like an offering to a god who'd stopped listening. The construction workers finished and left. The nurse paid her check. New customers filtered in. Booth 7 remained empty. The triangle toast growing cold. 8 o'clock. Rachel's chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with the medical debt or the eviction notice or the Honda's check engine light. Eleanor had come every single day for 6 months. Same time, same booth. People that consistent didn't just stop. People that alone didn't have anywhere else to be. 8:15. Rachel checked the door again, hating herself for caring, unable to stop caring anyway. The toast had gone hard. She threw it away and made a 3rd batch, knowing it was pointless. Doing it anyway because the alternative was admitting something had gone wrong. 8:30. Frank told her to stop wasting food. Rachel threw the 3rd batch of triangle toast in the trash and felt something crack in her chest that had been holding together through sheer stubbornness. She didn't know why this mattered so much. She only knew it did. 9:43 shattered the morning's ordinary rhythm like a brick through glass. The door opened and 6 men entered Sullivan's diner in a formation that didn't belong in a place that served $2 coffee and hash browns cooked in recycled grease. They were built like Secret Service agents, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of synchronized precision that came from military training or executive protection details or both. Black suits that probably cost more than Rachel's Honda. Earpieces with coiled wires disappearing into starch collars. Hands that stayed near their sides in a way that suggested weapons might be close. The entire diner fell silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Even the grease trap seemed to stop its eternal gurgling. The construction workers stared. Maria pressed herself against the far wall. Frank came out from behind the register looking like a man who'd just realized his insurance wasn't current. The men spread out with mathematical efficiency. 2 near the door, 2 scanning the kitchen entrance, 2 moving toward the booths. They weren't asking permission. They were securing a perimeter. Then the 7th man entered. He had silver hair styled with the precision of someone who paid a barber $200 every 2 weeks. His suit was charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe Tom Ford or something equivalent. Fitted so perfectly it might have been sewn directly onto his body. Italian leather shoes that clicked against Sullivan's cracked linoleum like judgments being passed. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than Rachel and probably cost more than her entire year's salary. He scanned the diner with pale blue eyes that processed and dismissed each person in half a second. His gaze landed on Rachel and stopped. He walked directly toward her, weaving between tables with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. Rachel stood frozen behind the counter, coffee pot in hand, brain struggling to process what was happening. Rich people didn't come to Sullivan's. People in Tom Ford suits definitely didn't come to Sullivan's. And they absolutely didn't walk toward waitresses like they had business to conduct. He stopped 3 feet away. Up close, Rachel could see he was perhaps 60, with a kind of face that had been handsome once and had aged into something more intimidating. Authority radiated from him like heat. "Are you Rachel Marie Bennett?" His voice was culture precise, the kind that came from private schools and Ivy League educations. He knew her middle name. Strangers didn't know her middle name. Rachel's hands tightened on the coffee pot. Her fight or flight response screaming that something was very wrong. "Yes? Who are you?" "My name is James Morrison. I'm the senior partner at Morrison, Caldwell and Associates. I represent the estate of Eleanor Catherine Whitmore." He paused, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I'm very sorry to inform you that Mrs. Whitmore passed away peacefully this morning at 4:17 a.m. The coffee pot slipped from Rachel's hand and shattered against the floor. Hot liquid splashed across her shoes, across the cracked linoleum, across the reality she'd been standing in 5 seconds ago. The sound echoed in the unnatural silence like a gunshot. Eleanor was dead. Rachel's knees went weak. She grabbed the counter for support, her brain trying to process information that didn't make sense. Eleanor was just a customer, just a silent woman in booth 7 who never said thank you, never made eye contact, never gave any indication that Rachel's existence mattered beyond the mechanical delivery of triangle toast and coffee. So why did this feel like losing her mother all over again? Why was her throat closing? Why were tears burning behind her eyes for someone she barely knew? "I don't understand," Rachel heard herself say. "Why are you telling me? I was just her waitress." James Morrison's expression shifted into something that might have been sympathy on a face more accustomed to delivering legal documents than comfort. "Mrs. Whitmore's final will and testament contains provisions that require your immediate presence. She was quite specific about this requirement." "Her will? That doesn't make sense. We never even spoke." "She never." Rachel's voice cracked. She pressed her palm against her eyes, trying to stop the tears that were coming anyway. Humiliated to be crying in front of this stranger, in front of her coworkers, in front of a diner full of customers watching this scene unfold. "Mrs. Whitmore noticed a great deal more than you realized," Morrison said quietly. He opened his briefcase and removed a single sheet of paper, handwritten in elegant script. He read aloud. "She cuts my toast into triangles, southwest to northeast, precisely even. She brings a small porcelain dish of local honey, placed at 2 o'clock from a plate center. She pours my coffee first and lets it cool for exactly 3 minutes before serving, bringing it to me at 138 degrees Fahrenheit. She does this every morning. She has done this for 6 months. She does it because she noticed my hands shake and wanted to help without making me feel diminished. Rachel stared at the paper. Every detail perfect. Every gesture cataloged. Every small kindness observed. Recorded, remembered. Eleanor had been watching. The entire time, Eleanor had been watching. The ritual hadn't been invisible. The triangle toast, the honey dish, the temperature-perfect coffee. Eleanor had noticed everything. Had measured the angles of the toast cuts. Had timed the coffee cooling. Had understood exactly why Rachel did what she did and cared enough to document it with scientific precision. Someone had been watching Rachel's small acts of kindness and had deemed them worth recording, worth remembering, worth writing into a legal document that brought 6 security guards and a senior partner in a Tom Ford suit to a forgotten diner on Pike Street. Rachel had spent 6 months believing she was serving a ghost, speaking to silence, caring for someone who didn't care back. But Eleanor had cared, had noticed, had seen Rachel in a way no one else had bothered to see her in years. The realization hit like a physical blow. Every morning, Eleanor had sat in booth 7 conducting a test Rachel didn't know existed, watching, measuring, judging, and somehow, impossibly, Rachel had passed. "I need you to come with me," Morrison said. "The will reading is scheduled for 11 o'clock. Mrs. Whitmore was very clear that you must be present." The Mercedes S-Class idling outside Sullivan's diner looked like it had been teleported from another dimension. Obsidian black, chrome accents catching the late morning sun, interior leather that probably cost more than Rachel earned in 6 months. One of the security guards opened the rear door with mechanical efficiency, revealing seats that looked like they belonged in a luxury hotel lobby, not a car. Rachel climbed in wearing her diner uniform, coffee-stained, smelling of hash browns and desperation, completely wrong for whatever world she was entering. The door closed with a sound that suggested German engineering and price tags with too many zeros. The leather seat adjusted automatically to her body. Climate control whispered to life. Classical music played so quietly she almost didn't notice it. Morrison sat across from her in the rear-facing seat, opening a tablet and scrolling through documents with practiced efficiency. He didn't speak. Rachel didn't know what to say. The Mercedes pulled away from the diner, from the only world that made sense, carrying her towards something her exhausted brain couldn't begin to process. They drove through downtown Seattle, past Pike Place Market where tourists took photos, past office buildings where people in expensive suits made important decisions, past the waterfront where the ferry horns called across Elliott Bay. Then they crossed a floating bridge toward Bellevue, and the city transformed. Mansions appeared on hillsides, gated communities, waterfront estates with private docks and boats that cost more than houses. The Mercedes turned onto a private road marked only by a discreet brass plate, Whitmore Estate. Wrought iron gates opened automatically. The driveway curved through landscape gardens that looked like they required a full-time staff. Then the house appeared, and Rachel's brain struggled to categorize it. Not a house, an architectural statement, glass and steel and stone, 3 stories of geometric precision overlooking Lake Washington, with panoramic windows that turned the entire structure into a viewing platform for a vista most people only saw in magazines. The Honda had 200,000 miles and a check engine light that never turned off. Rachel lived in a studio apartment 14 days from eviction. Her entire worldview involved surviving until tomorrow. This place existed in a reality where survival wasn't concerned, where money solved problems before they became problems, where views of Lake Washington were something you owned instead of visited. The Mercedes stopped at the entrance. The door opened. Morrison gestured for Rachel to exit. She stepped out onto stone pavers that probably cost $50 per square foot and felt like an imposter wearing a costume to a party where everyone knew she didn't belong. The entrance hall swallowed Rachel whole. Marble floors, polished to mirror brightness, stretched to the curved staircase that belonged in a museum. 20-foot ceilings. Abstract art that was probably worth more than Sullivan's Diner. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing Lake Washington like a painting someone had commissioned from God. Morrison led her through corridors that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. Every surface whispered wealth. The mahogany paneling, the recessed lighting, The fresh flowers in crystal vases that cost more than Rachel's monthly rent. Her shoes squeaked against the marble. The sound echoed. She felt like a stray cat that had wandered into a palace and was about to be escorted out by security. They entered a conference room that made Rachel's chest tighten. More marble, more mahogany, a table that could seat 20, polished to impossible brightness. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, where sailboats drifted like toys on blue water. Leather chairs that probably cost more than her Honda. The air smelled like furniture polish and money and the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. Rachel stood in the doorway wearing her Sullivan's Diner uniform, polyester fabric gone gray from too many washings, coffee stains on the sleeve that wouldn't come out, the name tag pinned crooked because she'd been in too much of a hurry this morning. The uniform smelled like grease and burnt hash browns and survival. She smelled like someone who didn't belong here, who would never belong here, who was about to be exposed as a mistake. Two people already occupied the room, and they looked at Rachel the way you'd look at something unpleasant you'd discovered on the bottom of your shoe. Victoria Whitmore Sterling sat at the head of the table like she owned it, which Rachel supposed she probably thought she did. 52 years old, with a kind of face that had been beautiful once and had been preserved through expensive maintenance. Her Chanel suit was ivory with gold buttons, cut in a style meant for someone 20 pounds lighter. Blonde hair styled into submission. Jewelry that caught the light aggressively. Diamond earrings, tennis bracelet, rings on 3 fingers. Everything about her screamed money, but it was loud money, desperate money. The kind that needed everyone to notice. Next to her sat Brandon Sterling, 28 and working hard to look like he wasn't trying. Designer athleisure, some brand Rachel didn't recognize, but that probably cost $300 for a hoodie. Sneakers that looked like art installations. His phone occupied his attention more than the room did. Thumb scrolling through what was probably Instagram or TikTok, barely acknowledging anyone's presence. Victoria's eyes traveled from Rachel's coffee-stained uniform to her worn shoes to her face, and something like contempt flickered across her perfectly maintained features. Her lips pursed. Her nostrils flared slightly. She looked at Morrison. "This is who we've been waiting for? A waitress." Brandon glanced up from his phone long enough to look at Rachel, let out a short laugh that sounded like a cough, and returned his attention to the screen. "You gotta be kidding me," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, but quiet enough to maintain deniability. Victoria didn't bother with subtlety. She turned to Morrison with an expression that suggested she'd just been asked to sit next to something unclean. "James, there must be some mistake. Mothers will specifically requested immediate family only." "Mrs. Whitmore's instructions were quite clear," Morrison said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from 40 years of legal practice. "Miss Bennett's presence is required. Shall we begin?" Victoria's jaw tightened. She gestured toward one of the leather chairs with a wave that managed to be both dismissive and commanding. "Well, sit down then. We don't have all day." Rachel moved toward the chair like she was approaching something that might bite. The leather creaked as she sat. It probably cost more than everything she owned combined. She folded her hands in her lap, acutely aware of the coffee stains, the grease smell, the polyester uniform that had seemed fine this morning and now felt like a costume designed to humiliate her. Brandon took a photo of the room with his phone, angling to get Rachel in the frame. His thumbs moved in the practiced motion of someone composing a social media post. Victoria didn't stop him. Rachel's stomach turned. She was going to end up on the internet. The poor waitress at the rich people's were reading. A punchline for strangers to mock. If you think this story is already uncomfortable, you haven't seen anything yet. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the will gets read. Morrison opened his briefcase and removed a document so thick it could have been a phone book. The pages whispered against each other as he set it on the table. 6 inches of legal paper. A lifetime of decisions bound in expensive linen stock. Victoria leaned forward, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Brandon set his phone down, suddenly interested. Rachel pressed herself back in a chair, trying to disappear into leather that cost more than her existence. Whatever was about to happen, she knew with absolute certainty she didn't belong here. James Morrison adjusted his reading glasses with the deliberate care of someone about to perform a ritual that had been performed exactly the same way for centuries. He cleared his throat. I am James Harrison Morrison, senior partner at Morrison, Caldwell & Associates, acting as executor for the estate of Eleanor Catherine Whitmore III, who passed away this morning at 4:17 a.m. at Swedish Medical Center. Mrs. Whitmore was of sound mind and body when this was executed on October 3rd of this year, approximately 5 weeks ago. The document has been witnessed, notarized, and filed according to Washington state law. He turned to the first page. The paper rustled in the silence. Outside the windows, Lake Washington sparkled with indifference. A sailboat drifted past. Somewhere in Seattle, people were living normal lives, dealing with normal problems, unaware that in this conference room overlooking their city, a woman's entire life was about to be divided among strangers. Victoria straightened in her chair, her hands folded on the table, her face arranged in an expression that attempted grief but looked more like anticipation. Brandon picked up his phone again, recording now, probably planning to live stream his inheritance to his followers. Morrison began to read. To my daughter Victoria Whitmore Sterling, I leave the sum of $5 million to be transferred in full within 30 days of my passing. I also leave her the Aspen property at 4782 Castle Creek Road, including all furnishings and contents. Additionally, she receives her existing shares in Whitmore Industries, comprising 8% of the company, to be maintained or sold at her discretion. Victoria's face went through a rapid sequence of emotions, relief, calculation, then something that looked like outrage struggling to stay professional. $5 million. The Aspen property. 8% of a company worth hundreds of millions. Most people would have wept with gratitude. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. Her hands gripped the table edge. Morrison continued without pausing. To my grandson Brandon Sterling, I leave the sum of $3 million to be held in trust until his 35th birthday or until he demonstrates sustained financial responsibility for a period of 3 consecutive years, whichever comes first. Additionally, he receives the Tesla stock portfolio purchased in his name, currently valued at approximately $400,000. Brandon's face went slack. Wait, what? A trust? I can't access it until I'm 35. Or until you demonstrate financial responsibility, Morrison clarified without looking up. That's it? Victoria's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stood up, her chair scraping against marble. $5 million? After everything? After 40 years of being her daughter? After everything I've done for this family? Her voice climbed with each question. The grief she'd been performing vanished, replaced by naked entitlement. She was worth over $200 million. $5 million is an insult. Please sit down, Mrs. Sterling, Morrison said. I'm not finished. Victoria remained standing, her face flushed, her carefully maintained composure cracking like ice under pressure. Brandon had stopped recording, his phone dangling forgotten in his hand, his expression hovering between confusion and outrage. Morrison turned another page. His voice remained neutral, professional, offering no judgment on the numbers he was reading or the reactions they produced. To Rachel Marie Bennett, employee of Sullivan's Diner, I leave a sum of $250,000 to be transferred in full within 30 days of my passing, free from all taxes and encumbrances. The room went silent in a way that was different from the silence before. This was the silence of shock, of disbelief, of realities colliding in ways that violated the natural order of things. Rachel's brain stuttered. $250,000. 250,000. The number didn't fit in her head. It was more money than she'd earned in her entire life. More than her mother's medical debt. More than she'd make in 5 years at Sullivan's. More than she'd ever imagined having at one time. She could pay off the debt. All of it. Every single collection notice. Every threatening letter. Every phone call that made her hands shake. She could save the Honda. Keep the apartment. Breathe. The tightness in her chest released, so suddenly she gasped. Tears burned her eyes. Her hands trembled worse than Eleanor's ever had. She pressed them against her face, trying to hold herself together, trying not to fall apart in front of these people who already thought she didn't belong. Victoria's voice shattered the moment like a hammer through glass. $250,000? To a grease slinger. She turned to Rachel, her face contorted with an emotion somewhere between contempt and fury. What did you do? How long were you working this? Did you manipulate her? Did you? Mrs. Sterling, Morrison began. No, this is fraud. This is elder abuse. She befriended a senile old woman, and Mrs. Whitmore was examined by 3 separate physicians in the month before she executed this will, Morrison said, his voice sharpening. All 3 certified her as completely mentally competent. Any challenge on those grounds will fail and will cost you considerably more in legal fees than it's worth. Brandon had his phone up again, recording, catching Rachel's tears and Victoria's rage and the moment when the world had divided itself into people who deserved and people who didn't. Morrison waited for Victoria to sit down. She didn't. She stood gripping the back of her chair like she might throw it. Morrison continued anyway. In addition to the monetary bequest, Rachel Marie Bennett also receives full ownership of the property located at 1847 Pike Street, Seattle, Washington, including the building, land, and all physical assets contained therein. This property is currently operated as Sullivan's Diner. Rachel's brief moment of relief evaporated. The diner. Eleanor had left her Sullivan's Diner, the building with its cracked vinyl booths and humming fluorescent lights and grease trap that needed constant maintenance. A property that might be worth $200,000 on a generous day, probably less given its condition and location. It felt like a joke, a cruel addendum to the life-changing money. Here, I have $250,000 and also a restaurant you don't know how to run in a building that needs $50,000 in repairs. Victoria's fury transformed into something worse, delight. She started laughing, a sharp sound that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with vindication. She leaves her a Roach Motel. Oh, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. Brandon joined in, his earlier disappointment forgotten in the face of someone else's misfortune. Better hope the health inspector doesn't visit. He held up his phone, recording Rachel's face. This is going on TikTok. Rich lady leaves fortune to family, leaves waitress her job. The comment would be brutal. Rachel felt her face burning. The diner wasn't worth nothing. It had been her lifeline for a year, the source of every paycheck that kept her barely afloat. But as an inheritance from a billionaire, it was insulting. It proved Victoria right. Rachel was just a waitress who'd been kind to an old woman and had gotten a token gift that meant nothing. The $250,000 suddenly felt like payment for services rendered. Like Eleanor had calculated exactly what 6 months of triangle toast and temperature-perfect coffee were worth and had compensated accordingly. Professional. Transactional. Not the recognition Rachel had briefly, stupidly allowed herself to imagine. Victoria had regained her composure, her rage replaced by smug satisfaction. Well, at least Mother showed some sense at the end. The real estate probably doesn't even cover the back taxes. If we may continue, Morrison said. Oh, by all means. Victoria settled back into her chair, crossing her legs, her diamond bracelet catching the light. I'm sure there's some heartfelt letter about how the waitress reminded Mother of someone or showed her kindness in her final days. Very touching. Please read on. Morrison's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been anticipation. He turned to the next page with deliberate slowness. The property transfer includes several additional provisions, he said. Morrison's voice maintained its professional neutrality, but the words that came out rearranged the room's gravity. Included with the diner property at 1847, Pike Street is the full commercial real estate portfolio designated as the Sullivan Holdings Group, comprising 17 properties in downtown Seattle and Bellevue, currently valued at $8.3 million. This portfolio generates approximately $47,000 in monthly rental income from tenants including law offices, medical practices, and technology startups. Full ownership, management rights, and all associated income transfer to Rachel Marie Bennett, effective immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's face drained of color like someone had opened a valve. Her mouth opened, closed, open again. No sound came out. Her hands gripped the table edge so hard her knuckles went white. Brandon dropped his phone. It clattered against the marble floor, the screen cracking with a sound like a small bone breaking. He didn't pick it up. He stared at Morrison like the lawyer had just spoken in a language Brandon's brain couldn't process. Rachel's entire body went numb. $8.3 million. $47,000 a month. The diner wasn't a joke. It wasn't payment. It was a cornerstone of an empire Eleanor had built quietly, piece by piece, hidden behind the facade of a failing restaurant in a forgotten corner of Seattle. The cracked vinyl booths, the humming lights, the grease trap, they weren't what mattered. They were camouflage, cover for what lay beneath, a commercial real estate portfolio that made the $250,000 look like pocket change. Eleanor hadn't left Rachel a cage. She'd left her a kingdom. That's not, Victoria found her voice, and it came out strangled. That can't be legal. That property belongs to the family trust. It's been in the Whitmore portfolio for. Mrs. Whitmore reorganized her assets 18 months ago. Morrison interrupted. The Sullivan Holdings Group was separated from the family trust and placed in her personal estate, specifically for distribution according to the terms of this will. Everything was done properly. Everything was filed. Everything is legal. But why? Brandon's voice cracked on the word. Why would she give millions to some random waitress? Morrison set down the document and removed his reading glasses. When he spoke, his voice carried something that hadn't been there before, not quite emotion, but something close to it. Mrs. Whitmore spent the last 6 months of her life conducting a test. She wanted to know if genuine kindness still existed in a world that had taught her that everyone wanted something. She sat in Sullivan's diner every morning, playing the role of someone forgotten, invisible, poor. She watched how people treated her when they thought she had nothing to offer in return. He looked at Victoria, then Brandon, then Rachel. Most people failed her test without knowing they were being tested. Rachel Bennett passed every single day for 6 months. She showed kindness without expectation, care without calculation, character without audience. Mrs. Whitmore documented everything. Every cut of toast, every dish of honey, every word spoken to fill silence. She found what she was looking for, and she rewarded it accordingly. Think about the people you ignore every day. The ones serving you coffee, cleaning your office, scanning your groceries. Would you pass Eleanor's test? Subscribe before you forget the uncomfortable truth you just learned. Victoria stood so fast her chair fell backward. This is insane. She was manipulated. She was tested, Morrison said quietly. And you failed. Morrison produced a small brass key from his briefcase and slid it across the polished table toward Rachel. It looked old, the kind that opened real locks instead of electronic systems, the kind that meant something. Mrs. Whitmore requested that you be given access to her private study before you leave today. No one else has been permitted inside that room for 3 years, not even housekeeping staff. She was very specific that you should see it alone. Rachel picked up the key. It was warm from Morrison's pocket, heavier than it looked. Victoria made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a growl, but Morrison's expression made it clear the matter wasn't up for debate. One of the security guards escorted Rachel through more corridors up the curved staircase, down a hallway lined with paintings that probably belonged to museums. They stopped at a door at the end of the hall, unmarked except for a deadbolt that looked like it could withstand a battering ram. The guard stepped back. Rachel inserted the key. The lock turned with the smooth precision of expensive mechanism, maintained perfectly despite years of disuse. The door opened. The smell hit her first. Paper, ink, coffee long gone cold. The staleness of a room sealed against the world. Heavy curtains blocked the windows. Rachel fumbled for a light switch. Fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, and the room revealed itself. It wasn't an office. It was a war room. 3 walls covered floor to ceiling with photographs, documents, newspaper clippings, printouts. Red string connected different elements, like a detective's investigation board from a crime show. Financial statements, bank records, court documents, surveillance photos. In the center of one wall, a large photograph of Sullivan's diner, with Rachel visible through the window carrying a coffee pot. A corkboard dominated the 4th wall, and Rachel walked toward it with legs that felt disconnected from her body. More photos, more documents, more evidence that Eleanor hadn't been sitting in booth 7 drinking coffee. She'd been conducting surveillance. Rachel found herself in dozens of images. Cutting toast, bringing the honey dish, pouring coffee, talking to empty air. Each photo labeled with dates, times, detailed observations written in Eleanor's precise handwriting. 6 months of documentation. Every gesture cataloged. Every kindness recorded. This wasn't random. This hadn't been chance. Eleanor had planned this for years. Rachel moved closer to the wall of evidence, her hands trembling. A section labeled family caught her attention. Photos of Victoria and Brandon. But these weren't the kind you'd frame and display. These were surveillance shots, private investigator work, the kind of documentation you compiled when you no longer trusted the people closest to you. A financial spreadsheet detailed Victoria's gambling debts. $2.7 million lost at casinos in Vegas, Monaco, and Macau. Credit cards maxed. Personal loans from family friends. A pattern stretching back 8 years. Carefully hidden, meticulously uncovered. Brandon's section was worse. Failed business ventures, funded with family money. A cryptocurrency scheme that lost $4 million in 6 weeks. Screenshots of Instagram posts showing luxury purchases made the same month he'd claimed poverty and asked Eleanor for a loan. Transaction records proving he'd lied about where the money went. Another section showed legal documents. Victoria and Brandon had attempted to have Eleanor declared mentally incompetent 2 years ago. They'd hired doctors, lawyers, initiated proceedings to place her in a memory care facility against her will. The goal was obvious: control her assets, manage her accounts, make decisions on her behalf. They'd failed. Eleanor had been sharp enough to see them coming, ruthless enough to document everything, and patient enough to wait for the right moment to respond. A timeline on another board showed Eleanor's investigation starting immediately after the competency hearing. She'd hired private investigators, forensic accountants, surveillance teams. She'd spent 2 years compiling evidence of Victoria and Brandon's greed, their lies, their betrayals. Then 18 months ago, the strategy shifted. A new section appeared on the board. The test. Photos of different diners around Seattle. Notes about visiting them, observing staff, watching interactions. Eleanor had been searching for something specific. A place where people revealed their true character. A location where kindness could be tested without wealth or status influencing the results. Then, Sullivan's Diner. Photos of Rachel from before Eleanor had ever sat in booth 7. Rachel helping an elderly customer with a dropped fork. Rachel giving her own lunch to a homeless man who'd wandered in. Rachel staying late to help Frank clean when the night dishwasher quit without notice. Eleanor hadn't chosen Sullivan's randomly. She'd chosen it because of Rachel. And everything that followed, the 6 months of silence, the triangle toast, the temperature-perfect coffee, had been Eleanor's way of confirming what she'd already suspected. Rachel Bennett had a good heart, and Eleanor Whitmore had been desperately searching for someone who did. Rachel found the photograph in the center of everything else, positioned like a sun around which all other evidence orbited. A young woman, perhaps 23, with dark hair and a smile that suggested she'd never met a stranger. The photo was from the 1970s, based on the clothing and the faded color processing. The woman wore bell-bottom jeans and a tie-dye shirt, standing in front of what looked like a community center, arms around 2 elderly people who were grinning at the camera. A brass plate beneath the frame read, Catherine Eleanor Whitmore, 1951 to 1974. More photos of Catherine filled a dedicated section. Catherine serving food at a soup kitchen. Catherine working behind the counter at a diner that wasn't Sullivan's, but could have been its sister. Catherine at a nursing home, holding hands with a resident who looked like she hadn't had a visitor in years. Every image showed the same thing: someone who saw people others ignored, who helped without expecting credit, who made the world softer for those the world had forgotten. A newspaper clipping from 1974. Local woman killed in accident. Catherine had been driving to deliver groceries to homebound seniors when a drunk driver crossed the center line. Dead at 23. A life of kindness cut short by random cruelty. Rachel found a handwritten letter in Eleanor's distinctive script, tucked into a folder marked Private Thoughts. Catherine created spaces for people who had nowhere else to go. She worked in diners, community centers, anywhere that served those society overlooked. She died believing in human goodness. After she was gone, I adopted Victoria, hoping to fill the void Catherine left. But Victoria never understood what Catherine knew instinctively. That wealth means nothing if it doesn't serve character. That power means nothing if it doesn't protect the powerless. I spent 40 years building an empire Catherine would have found obscene. I spent 40 years with family members who saw dollar signs instead of duty. And I spent the last 2 years searching for what I'd lost when Catherine died. Proof that people like her still existed. Rachel Bennett has Catherine's heart, not her blood, but her spirit. And that matters infinitely more. Below the letter, a recent photograph of Rachel, taken from across the diner. She was refilling coffee for an elderly customer, smiling at something they'd said, present and attentive, written in Eleanor's hand across the bottom. She is worthy. Rachel returned to Sullivan's Diner 3 days after the reading, wearing the same coffee-stained uniform, driving the same rattling Honda, arriving at the same 5:45 in the morning. Everything looked identical to how it had looked a week ago. The cracked vinyl booths, the humming fluorescent lights, the grease trap that gurgled like a dying animal. Except now she owned it. Owned the building, the equipment, the business license, and the commercial real estate empire hidden beneath its failing facade. She was a millionaire carrying a coffee pot, a property owner about to clock in for the morning shift. Frank was already behind the register when she walked in, his perpetual scowl firmly in place. Maria stood by the coffee station, arms crossed. 2 other servers, Jenny and Carlos, lingered near the kitchen entrance. They all watched her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to suspicion to something that looked like betrayal. Rachel tied her apron with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The silence pressed down like weight. Frank spoke first. "So, you're the boss now?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation wrapped in 4 words. Rachel heard everything he didn't say. "You lied to us. You pretended to be one of us. You were playing a game while we were just trying to survive." "I didn't know," Rachel said. "I swear I didn't know Eleanor was." "Eleanor?" Maria's voice cut sharp. "You're calling her Eleanor now? Not Mrs. Whitmore? Now that she's made you rich, you're on a first-name basis." "That's not." Rachel's throat closed. She'd called the woman in booth 7 Eleanor in her head for months, but saying it out loud now sounded like she'd been part of some conspiracy, like she'd known all along what was coming. "Are you going to fire us?" Jenny asked quietly. Her voice trembled. She had 3 kids and an ex-husband who didn't pay child support. This job was her lifeline, the same way it had been Rachel's a week ago. No, I would never." "Then what?" Frank's jaw tightened. "You want to gut this place? Turn it into some fancy cafe? Raise prices so none of our regulars can afford to eat here anymore?" Rachel looked at the faces staring at her and realized she'd become what they feared. Someone with power over their survival. Someone who could make decisions that would destroy their lives. Someone who'd stopped being one of them the moment Eleanor's lawyer said her name. The industrial freezer died at 7:32 a.m., right in the middle of the breakfast rush. Carlos noticed it first. The compressor's eternal hum had gone silent. He opened the door, and warm air rolled out instead of the Arctic blast that should have hit his face. 80 pounds of meat, 40 pounds of frozen vegetables, ice cream for the pies, butter, eggs stored for weekend brunch prep, $8,000 worth of food sitting in a metal box that had stopped being cold. Frank's face went through several emotions in rapid sequence: panic, calculation, resignation. He looked at Rachel with an expression that said, "Here's where you fail. Here's where you prove you're not qualified. Here's where reality comes for you." "Freezer's dead," he said flatly. "Compressor's been dying for 6 months. I told the owner, told Eleanor, that we needed to replace it. She kept saying next month. Now it's dead, and we've got $8,000 in food that'll spoil in 2 hours." The old Rachel would have panicked, would have called every repair service in the phone book, begging for someone to come, knowing none of them would arrive in time, watching helplessly as thousands of dollars of food became trash, would have felt the weight of failure crushing her chest, proving she didn't belong anywhere near business ownership. But the old Rachel didn't have Eleanor's money, didn't have a portfolio generating $47,000 a month, didn't have resources that could solve problems instead of just absorbing them. Rachel pulled out her phone, a new one, purchased 2 days ago when her cracked screen finally gave up, and Googled commercial refrigeration repair Seattle emergency. The first company answered on the second ring. "This is Rachel Bennett. I own Sullivan's Diner on Pike Street. Our industrial freezer just failed completely. I need someone here within 2 hours. I'll pay triple your emergency rate." She could feel Frank staring at her. Maria had stopped wiping tables. Even the construction workers were listening. "Yes, triple. I need it fixed today. If you can't fix it, I need a replacement installed by tomorrow morning. Money isn't the issue. Time is. She gave them the address, her new credit card number, authorized whatever charges were necessary. 2 technicians would arrive within 90 minutes. A replacement unit was on standby if the repair proved impossible. Rachel hung up and immediately called a commercial food supplier. I need an emergency delivery. Everything on this list. She rattled off items from memory. She'd been ordering for Sullivan's long enough to know their inventory by heart. I need it here by noon. I'll pay the rush fees. Frank's expression had shifted from expectation of failure to something more complex. Confusion. Grudging respect. The realization that Rachel hadn't just inherited money. She'd inherited the ability to solve problems that had been crushing them for years. The food that's spoiling, Rachel said, hanging up. We donate what we can to the shelter on 3rd Avenue. The rest gets properly disposed of. We're not serving anything that's been warm. We tell customers we're running a limited menu today and comp their coffee. She looked at Frank directly. You were right. We needed a new freezer 6 months ago. We're getting one now. What else has been breaking that we've been ignoring because we couldn't afford to fix it? Frank stared at her for a long moment. Then he walked to the office, a closet-sized room that smelled like old coffee and disappointment, and emerged with a manila folder so stuffed with papers it wouldn't close properly. He dropped it on the counter in front of Rachel. That's 15 years of things breaking and getting patched instead of fixed. The dishwasher runs on hope and duct tape. The griddle has hot spots that'll burn food if you're not paying attention. The roof leaks in 3 places. The plumbing backs up once a month. The ventilation system violates code, but we can't afford the upgrade. The tables wobble. The booths are ripped. The flooring's coming up. The sign outside hasn't worked in 4 years. He opened the folder. Repair estimates. Building inspector warnings. Equipment failure reports. A litany of problems that had accumulated because fixing them meant choosing between repairs and payroll, between maintenance and keeping the lights on. Eleanor knew, Frank said quietly. I showed her this folder every quarter. She'd look through it, nod, and say, we'd handle it next year. I thought she didn't care. I thought we were just a tax, write-off she was letting die slowly. Rachel looked at the folder, at 15 years of deferred maintenance, and understood what Eleanor had really been doing. She'd let Sullivan's decay on purpose, had kept it barely functional, because the test wasn't about running a successful business. It was about how people treated each other in a place that was failing. You don't learn someone's character in a palace. You learn it in a place where everything is broken and nobody's coming to fix it. Rachel closed the folder and looked at the staff watching her. Frank with his arms crossed, Maria with her suspicious eyes, Jenny and Carlos hovering near the kitchen, all of them waiting to see what kind of boss she'd become. I don't know how to run a business, Rachel said. The words felt like pulling glass from her throat. I don't know about profit margins or inventory management or health code compliance or any of it. What I know is how to cut toast into triangles and pour coffee at the right temperature. Frank's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Frank, you've managed this place for 15 years. You've kept it running with broken equipment and no budget and an owner who wouldn't fix anything. I need your expertise. I need all of you. She took a breath. Everyone keeps their job. Everyone gets a 20% raise starting next paycheck. We're setting up a profit-sharing plan. When the diner makes money, you make money. We're fixing everything in that folder, starting with the freezer and working down the list. Maria's arms uncrossed slightly. Jenny's eyes widened. This place was Eleanor's test, Rachel continued. But it doesn't have to stay broken just because that's what she needed it to be. We can fix it. We can make it something better. But I can't do it alone. I need partners, not employees. I need people who'll tell me when I'm making stupid decisions because I'm still learning. I need you. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. Frank looked at the folder, then at Rachel, then at the freezer that was already being repaired by technicians who'd arrived early because money had made the impossible happen. 20% raise, he said finally. Starting next week, profit sharing. The diner's income gets split. Fair percentages based on seniority and hours worked. You'll see the books. Everything transparent. Frank held out his hand. Then I guess we're partners. Rachel shook it. and something that had been knotted in her chest since the will reading finally loosened. The staff was still watching, still uncertain. But the wall between them had developed its first crack. They had work to do, equipment to fix, a business to rebuild. But for the first time since Eleanor died, Rachel felt like she might actually know what she was doing. The lawsuit arrived 6 days after the will reading, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic about his job. Victoria Whitmore Sterling versus the estate of Eleanor Catherine Whitmore. 43 pages of legal language that boiled down to a single accusation. Rachel Bennett had manipulated a mentally incompetent elderly woman into changing her will through a pattern of predatory behavior designed to exploit vulnerability for financial gain. The media discovered the story within hours. Brandon's TikTok post went viral. Short videos painting Rachel as a gold-digging waitress who targeted a lonely billionaire, complete with screenshots of the will and dramatic music suggesting conspiracy. The comment section became a battlefield between people who thought Rachel was a manipulative monster and people who thought Victoria was a spoiled brat. Local news picked it up next. Billionaires will sparks family lawsuit. Waitress receives millions while daughter gets less. The story had everything: wealth, betrayal, class warfare. A photogenic villain, depending on which side you believed. Rachel's face appeared on television. A photo from her driver's license that made her look exhausted and slightly criminal. Then the national outlets caught wind. Cable news segments debated the ethics of service workers befriending wealthy clients. Opinion pieces argued about elder abuse versus genuine kindness. Rachel became shorthand for larger cultural arguments she'd never asked to represent. She stopped reading the comments after the first day, stopped watching the news after the third. But she couldn't stop the phone calls from reporters, the photographers outside Sullivan's diner, the sudden scrutiny that made her feel like an insect pinned under glass. Victoria appeared on morning shows, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, telling a story about a mother who'd been declining for years, a family trying desperately to protect her, and a stranger who'd inserted herself into their lives for personal gain. She cried on camera. The audience sympathized. Rachel stayed silent because Morrison had advised her to, but the silence felt like cowardice, like letting lies become truth through unopposed repetition. Morrison called a meeting at his office 4 days after the lawsuit was filed. Rachel sat in the same conference room where her life had been transformed, though this time it felt less like a palace and more like a war room. "We could fight this in court," Morrison said, laying out documents on the table. "We'd win. I'm 98% certain. Eleanor's competency evaluations are bulletproof. The surveillance footage proves there was no manipulation. Victoria's own financial problems established clear motive for the lawsuit." But Rachel heard the word coming even before Morrison said it. But lawsuits like this take years. Victoria has the resources to drag this through appeals, depositions, motions, discovery. Even if we win every battle, the war will cost you hundreds of thousands in legal fees and turn your life into a public spectacle for the next 3 to 5 years. Rachel's stomach sank. So what do we do? Morrison removed his reading glasses and looked at her with an expression that suggested he was about to propose something unprecedented. "We don't win on money or legal procedure. We win on truth. We expose Victoria and Brandon so thoroughly, so publicly, and so devastatingly that continuing the lawsuit becomes impossible." "How?" Eleanor's memorial service is scheduled for Saturday at the Seattle Art Museum. 300 guests. The city's old money families, business leaders, philanthropists. Everyone who mattered in Eleanor's world. Victoria and Brandon will be there, playing the grieving family, accepting condolences, positioning themselves as the true inheritors of Eleanor's legacy. Morrison pulled out a folder marked evidence. Eleanor knew this would happen. She predicted Victoria would challenge the will, so she prepared a response. Video testimony, documentary evidence, a complete catalog of Victoria and Brandon's financial failures, lies, and the attempted competency hearing. Everything needed to destroy their credibility. "You want to play this at her memorial?" Rachel's voice came out shocked. Eleanor wanted it played at her memorial. She was very specific. She said if Victoria challenged the will, the truth should be revealed in front of the people whose opinions Victoria cares about most. Not a courtroom where it takes years. Not the media where spin matters, in front of 300 witnesses who've known the Whitmore family for decades. Morrison leaned forward. Eleanor orchestrated this entire situation, Rachel. The test, the will, the inheritance structure designed to provoke Victoria into exactly this lawsuit. She knew her daughter. She knew this would happen. And she left you the ammunition to end it in one evening. Rachel thought about Booth 7, about Triangle Toast, about 6 months of silence that had actually been observation. Eleanor had been planning this confrontation for years, had recorded everything, had prepared Rachel to fight a war Rachel hadn't known was coming. What do I have to do? Rachel asked. The Seattle Art Museum glowed with the kind of understated wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Soft lighting, classical music playing at conversation volume, 300 guests in formal wear holding wine glasses, speaking in hushed tones about Eleanor's legacy and impact and the tragedy of her passing. Rachel stood outside the entrance wearing a dress Eleanor had left for her. Vintage Chanel from the 1980s, perfectly tailored, probably worth more than Rachel had earned in the last 5 years. A note had accompanied it. Wear this. You'll need armor for what comes next. Victoria stood near the entrance, accepting condolences with practiced grace. She wore black Dior diamond earrings, an expression of dignified grief. Brandon stood beside her, uncomfortable in a formal suit, checking his phone periodically until Victoria shot him warning looks. Rachel walked in and Victoria's eyes locked onto her with an intensity that could have melted steel. The expression lasted half a second before professional composure reasserted itself. But Rachel had seen the rage underneath, the fear. Morrison appeared at Rachel's elbow. Eleanor's video testimony is queued up. When you're ready to speak, just walk to the podium. The technical team knows what to do. Rachel moved through the crowd like she was swimming through water. People stared, whispered. She heard fragments. That's the waitress. The one from the lawsuit. Can you believe she had the nerve to show up? Margaret Chin, Eleanor's oldest friend, stood near the front. She was 81, tiny, dressed in elegant black. And when Rachel passed, she reached out and squeezed Rachel's hand. Eleanor spoke about you, she said quietly. She said you had a good heart. That's all that matters. The memorial proceeded according to plan. A business associate spoke about Eleanor's vision. A museum director discussed her philanthropy. Victoria gave a speech about her mother's strength and legacy, her voice breaking at precisely calculated moments. The audience dabbed their eyes. Then Morrison approached the podium. Eleanor left video testimony to be played at this service. She wanted her own voice to be heard. He gestured toward the screen behind him. The room went silent. The lights dimmed. Eleanor's face appeared, recorded in what looked like Morrison's office, probably weeks before she died. She looked tired but sharp, her eyes clear, her voice steady. If you're watching this, it means Victoria has challenged my will. It means she couldn't accept what I left her and demanded more. It means exactly what I predicted would happen has happened. Victoria's face went pale. Brandon looked up from his phone. I'm going to tell you a story, Eleanor continued, about family, about greed, and about a test that most people failed without knowing they were being tested. The room was absolutely silent. 300 people who'd come expecting a tasteful memorial were about to witness something else entirely. Eleanor smiled on screen. Let me introduce you to Rachel Bennett, the woman my daughter is currently suing, the woman who passed every test I gave her, and the woman who deserves every penny I left her. What followed wasn't a speech. It was a prosecution. Eleanor's video laid out the timeline. Victoria and Brandon's attempt to have her declared incompetent. The hearing where she'd proven her mental sharpness by reciting financial statements from memory and discussing current events with pointed accuracy. The moment she'd realized her own family had tried to steal her autonomy. So I decided to test them, Eleanor said on screen. I wanted to know if they cared about me or my money. I gave them opportunities. I asked for help with simple things. I pretended to be confused about basic tasks. Every time, they responded with impatience or sent someone else to deal with me. They failed repeatedly. The screen split. On one side, Eleanor's face. On the other, documentary evidence. Bank statements showing Victoria's gambling debts. $2.7 million lost over 8 years. Screenshots of Brandon's failed cryptocurrency ventures. For $1 million of family money gone in 6 weeks. Text messages between Victoria and Brandon discussing how to handle Eleanor, referring to her as the obstacle. The room had gone from silent to something beyond silence. People weren't just quiet, they'd stopped breathing. Then I found Rachel Bennett, Eleanor continued. I spent 6 months in her diner, pretending to be poor, invisible, forgotten. She cut my toast into triangles because she noticed my hands shook. She brought honey without being asked. She talked to me like I mattered when the entire world had decided I didn't. The screen showed footage from the camera in Eleanor's brooch. Rachel refilling coffee, cutting toast, sitting in booth 7 during a slow moment, talking about her mother, about culinary school, about dreams she'd abandoned. Victoria wanted my money, Eleanor said. Rachel wanted nothing. That's why she gets everything Victoria thought she deserved. That's why she earned it. Because character matters more than blood. The screen went dark. Victoria stood frozen. Her carefully maintained composure shattered. Brandon had his phone out, probably trying to delete his social media accounts in real time. 300 witnesses had just watched their credibility dissolve. The silence after Eleanor's video lasted 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. Then Margaret Chin, 81 years old and Eleanor's friend since college, started clapping. Slow, deliberate, each impact of her palms together like a judgment being rendered. Others joined. 1 person, then 5, then 20, then the entire room. 300 people applauding not Eleanor's memory, but the exposure they'd just witnessed. The truth revealed. The villains unmasked. Justice delivered not through years of litigation, but through one devastating evening. Victoria's face had gone from pale to red. She grabbed Brandon's arm and pushed toward the exit, moving fast but trying to maintain dignity. People stepped aside to let them pass, their applause following like a wave. No one stopped Victoria to offer condolences. No one reached for Brandon to shake his hand. They left the memorial in disgrace, and the applause continued until the door closed behind them. Morrison approached Rachel. The lawsuit will be withdrawn by Monday. I guarantee it. No lawyer would advise continuing after what just happened here. He was right. Victoria's attorney called Sunday afternoon. The lawsuit was dropped with prejudice. No settlement. No negotiation. Just a quiet retreat and the understanding that pursuing this further would only compound the humiliation. Sullivan's Diner reopened on a Tuesday morning in May, 6 months after Eleanor Whitmore had last sat in booth 7. The bones of the place remained. Same location, same layout, same red vinyl booths. But everything else had been transformed. New equipment hummed in the kitchen, reliable and efficient. Fresh paint-covered walls that had been dingy for decades. The flooring was level. The lighting was warm instead of harsh. The sign outside actually worked, glowing cheerfully against the Seattle morning. Booth 7 held a bronze plaque mounted on the wall. Eleanor Catherine Whitmore sat here every morning for 6 months, testing the character of strangers. She found what she was looking for. The staff had stayed. Frank managed operations with the confidence of someone whose expertise was finally respected instead of ignored. Maria trained new servers using methods she perfected over 12 years. Jenny and Carlos had been promoted to shift supervisors with raises that reflected their value. Everyone participated in profit sharing. Everyone knew the books. Everyone had a stake in making the place succeed. Rachel arrived most mornings at 6, though not to work the floor anymore. She spent her time learning business management through an accelerated program at the University of Washington, studying finance and operations and human resources. The real estate portfolio required professional management. She'd hired a firm Morrison recommended. But she reviewed the reports, learned the terminology, asked questions until she understood every decision being made with Eleanor's legacy. The diner was profitable now, not wildly successful but sustainable. It served the same construction workers and night shift nurses it always had, but the prices were fair, the food was better, and the staff was paid enough to live instead of just survive. Eleanor's test location had become something Eleanor would have been proud of, a place that proved kindness and profit weren't mutually exclusive. Rachel still cut toast into triangles for elderly customers, still brought honey without being asked, Still poured coffee at the temperature people preferred after watching them long enough to notice. The habits Eleanor had observed had become habits Rachel didn't want to break. The Honda still sat in the parking lot, though Rachel could afford to replace it now. She kept it because it reminded her of where she'd been 6 months ago, of who she'd been when Eleanor first sat in booth 7. Success hadn't erased struggle. Wealth hadn't erased memory. The woman who'd been 14 days from eviction still existed inside the woman who now owned $8 million in commercial real estate. The foundation launched in March with a mission Eleanor had outlined in documents she'd left with Morrison: supporting service workers pursuing education, scholarships for waitresses, janitors, home health aides, retail workers, people doing essential work while dreaming of something more. First-year funding, 50 scholarships, ranging from $5,000 to $25,000 each. Enough to cover tuition, books, living expenses. Enough to make culinary school or nursing programs or business degrees possible for people who'd been told they should be grateful just to have jobs. Rachel administered it personally, reviewing applications, conducting interviews, selecting recipients. She looked for the same thing Eleanor had looked for: character under pressure, kindness without expectation, people who helped others even when helping cost them something they couldn't afford to give. The foundation was funded through Eleanor's estate and profits from Sullivan's Diner. Every triangle-cut piece of toast, every cup of temperature-perfect coffee, contributed to someone else's education. The cycle Eleanor had started continued, rippling outward in ways Rachel was only beginning to understand. Victoria and Brandon had been invited to serve on the foundation's board. Eleanor's will had included a provision offering them redemption. If they contributed their time and expertise to helping others, they could still be part of the family legacy. Both had declined through their lawyers. They'd disappeared from Seattle society, retreating to Aspen or Monaco or wherever people went when their reputations had been destroyed beyond repair. Rachel didn't miss them, didn't think about them except when signing foundation checks, when each scholarship represented what Victoria and Brandon had rejected: the opportunity to turn wealth into meaning, privilege into purpose, inheritance into impact. Eleanor had left Rachel more than money. She'd left her a blueprint for what wealth should do, what power should serve, what character should build. And Rachel was building it one scholarship at a time, one person at a time, one small act of kindness that rippled outward toward futures she'd never see, but had helped make possible. The greatest investments we make aren't in stocks, real estate, or businesses. They're in each other. A triangle-cut piece of toast, offered without expectation to someone the world forgot, rippled outward in ways Rachel Bennett could never have predicted. It paid medical debt. It saved a diner. It funded 50 scholarships. It proved that kindness wasn't weakness, that character mattered more than blood, that the smallest gestures could carry the weight of entire legacies. Eleanor Whitmore spent her final months testing humanity and found it hadn't failed completely. She found someone who cut toast into careful triangles for hand that shook, someone who brought honey without being asked, someone who talked to silence because filling emptiness mattered more than receiving acknowledgement. The test wasn't about the coffee or the toast or the honey. It was about seeing people who'd become invisible, about caring when caring cost something, about maintaining kindness when no reward was visible on the horizon. Rachel passed because she never knew she was being tested. She was simply being herself, a person who noticed when others suffered and tried to make that suffering slightly more bearable. That quality, Eleanor had decided, was worth $8 million and the continuation of a legacy built on the principle that wealth meant nothing if it didn't serve character. Who are the Eleanor Whitmores in your life? The invisible people you pass every day, serving your coffee, cleaning your office, scanning your groceries, delivering your packages? Do you have the grace to see them? Like this video, if this story made you think differently about the people you ignore. And here's the uncomfortable truth that should keep you awake tonight. What if someone is watching you right now? What if your character is being tested in ways you don't recognize? What if the way you treat the server, the janitor, the delivery driver is being cataloged by someone who matters? Would they find you worthy? Comment below. What would you have done in Rachel's position? Would you have cut the toast into triangles? Would you have kept serving someone who never said thank you? Be honest, most people wouldn't. Eleanor Whitmore spent 6 months testing one person. Life tests all of us every single day, in moments we don't recognize as tests until they're over. The question isn't whether you pass Eleanor's test. The question is whether you're passing the tests happening right now, today, with people you're choosing to see or ignore. Subscribe for more stories that restore your faith in humanity, or at least make you examine your own. Share this with someone who needs to know their kindness matters, that small gestures carry weight, that triangle cut toast can change someone's entire life. Hit that notification bell, because the next story might be about someone you know. It might be about you, and you want to know if you passed.